Hello and welcome to what is our second edition of Coaching Conversations. This is an opportunity for you to eavesdrop on the kind of conversations two coaches might have that help you in your leadership and in your business. And today, as an overarching theme, we want to look at goal setting. And one of the ways, and first I would cue it up, is I have found in working with people that there are some folks that very naturally think about goal setting. They spend time in goal setting and they do a fairly decent job of it. And then there's a whole arsenal of people who just are activistic. They're very proactive in what they do, but they haven't really began with the end in mind. And so the goal becomes whatever emerges from what they're doing. So I guess, Brian, my first question for you is why do you feel like some sort of practice or discipline around goal setting is important, and how is it valuable to somebody who's an entrepreneur or executive leader?
Yeah, goals are critical because one of the key things that an entrepreneur has to become is self-directed. And if you don't set targets, the chances are somebody else is going to set a target, or circumstances can set a target. So I mean, we need goals, as you said, to begin with the end in mind, to figure out where we want our business to go. And I also think with goals, a lot of times what we'll default to is if you don't set a big goal, and we'll probably come back to that, all your goals end up being are whatever you did last year. And you just kind of create a to-do list over against actual goals that stretch you and make you grow. One of my favorite goal quotes comes from the old coach, Jim Rohn. You want to set a goal big enough that in the process of achieving it, you become someone worth becoming. So that brings the personal growth dimension. We want to set big goals, not simply to succeed in our business, but to see where we can actually get as persons.
I think an under talked about aspect of goal setting that is relevant here is I would draw the analogy of sometimes when my kids were younger, we would go on a vacation and not necessarily tell them where we were going. And what we found is that when that would happen, they were very resistant, they were very unmotivated and very disengaged. And then they got to this place and it was like a surprise to them. Versus letting them know where we were going in advance, getting their buy-in and getting them engaged in the process created a very different experience. If you're leading other people, it is important that the people that you're leading have some sense of where you're taking them, and where you're taking them is directly related to what your goals are. So I think it's very difficult to lead other people without having some element of goal setting. The other aspect is that when you establish goals, you in turn have a lot of credibility in talking with the people that you're collaborating with, working with, in having them set goals. And ultimately, this is something that I think is really, really important to get. It is very difficult to lead people who do not know what they want. And when you're leading people who do not have goals, you are trying to lead people who don't know what they want. And it just is it's resistance. I don't know if you've experienced that or not.
Yes, and sometimes entrepreneurs don't know what you want. You just simply want, I want to make more money, and then just hand them $1 and here's more money, right?
Yeah. Oh,
so
wow.
I'm
successful.
I'm successful. So we want to ask ourselves, if we don't know what we want, again, somebody else is going to sort of decide for us, or we default into last year. And one of the key things that we want to do in our coaching is we want to help our clients, because we do this in our own lives. We want our clients to grow every year. So it's vital to think, what do you really want this year? Do you want to actually work fewer days, for example? Set that as a goal, and then let's work backwards to figure out how you can either delegate responsibilities or schedule your own week. So maybe you work longer days, certain days of the week, so you can have more time off. But that all starts with a goal. So, I mean, what is it that you really want?
And I find that obviously when it comes to goal setting, I told you that there are those that don't set goals, but among those that do set goals, there are some who do it very well, and there are some who do it poorly. And I'm curious, what are some distinctives or distinctions in your mind between poor goal setting and effective goal setting?
Yeah, well, some of the key things that would make a goal poor is a goal to be a good goal has to be specific. And we already said about more money. Well, how much more money? I want to find more clients this year. Well, what specifically is your value proposition? And then what would your ideal client be? So then you can actually set up the target to get those persons. So you always have to be as specific as possible. And the other thing, common mistake, is you have to set a goal that at least mostly is in your control to attain. You can just joke about relationships. I want to be married to X. Well, if that person's never going to meet you, you have zero chance, right? And so you have to figure out, you have to have at least a reasonable possibility that it's in your control to be able to attain a goal. So again, in your business, what can you control? What can't you control? If your goal is to pay fewer taxes, well, the only way that you can control that is by not making any money. Now, the government can do whatever it wants with the taxes. You really don't have control over that part. So you want to think about what is in your control and make sure your goals, then you can build systems around it. That's the key with the goals. The goals give us a target, and then the system are the things that we can control, that we can take action on, that allow us to attain. That'd be the two things. What have you run into?
Yeah, I'll tell you, along that line around specificity, I love Chris McChesney's work and Sean Covey's work in the 4 disciplines of execution, of basically identifying wildly important goals and stating them in the form of, I want to go from X to Y by when. And what I love about that as a tool for goal setting is that you have to know what X is. You have to know your starting point, and you have to get specific about where your destination point is and the time frame that you're going to do that. I think that's probably the biggest mistake that I find. The other thing that you alluded to that I will elaborate a little bit further is it's about a target of which you then coordinate systems around. I actually think that there is a system to goal setting. And what I mean by that is that there needs to be a larger longitudinal sense of goals. And that may be very nebulous and less specific, but it's got to be big enough. It's got to be out there far enough into the future. Like, for example, I want to go from $1 million in net worth to $30 million in net worth in 10 years. And so you may have absolutely very little clarity of how you're going to go from 10 to 30 or 1 to 30 or even 1 to 10. But you got to have that. And then you got to work backwards to a much more granular level. It says, okay, in this year, this is that part of the pie that I'm going to eat. And then continue to work backwards and say, okay, this month, this is the part of the pie that I'm going to focus on. And then work further backwards in understanding this week. This is what I'm going to focus on, and then further back and say, okay, this day. And what's interesting is when you have that larger system, what you're doing today will often look like tasks, but those tasks are aligned and hopefully are congruent with where you're going to be a year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road. I think one of the clear examples of bad goal setting is it just becomes a litany of daily tasks that you want to complete. Congratulations, you're really, really good at completing tasks, but you may or may not necessarily be getting where you're wanting to go. And I think it was Covey in Principle-Centered Leadership, or one of his books, other than the one that he's most famous for, tells a story of developing a great system and process to chop through the woods, only to find yourself at the end of that process being in the wrong geography. And I think that can sometimes happen.
Yeah, and the goals then, going right along with that is if you have your big target, the way you avoid from going to tasks is you have to take your big goals and schedule that directly into your calendar by how you allocate your time, because as business owners, stuff always comes up, right? And you can spend your day.
Happens.
Yeah,
it happens.
Just putting out fires. So, one of the things that I like to do, it's part of my my own role as a coach, is I like to write. And so that takes my best brain power. And so essentially, if you look at my calendar, every day, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m., writing or content creation, because I just own that, because that's one of my goals. I want to produce a book every year for the next 25 years. I want to make videos. And so 8 to 9, and that may not sound like a lot, but 8 to 9 lets me do about 500 words. If I write 500 words every day of the year, I've actually written 4 books. So I don't even have to hit it every time, but I've got that on because that would be like 180,000 words. Again, it's just these little small things. So you have to schedule, you have to calendar your priorities from your goals. So your goals have to go directly into the calendar. Otherwise, you end up having problems.
Yeah, there's a direct correlation between goal setting and time management. You can't talk about one without the other. I think the goal setting really sets the priorities of what your calendar looks like, but your calendar is the practical execution of your goal pursuits. And so it really is important. A friend of mine, a colleague of mine, Patrick Wilson, pre-digital days, I've known him that long, used to say, what's the most powerful force in the universe? And some people in a crowd of people would say, oh, it's love. And some would say God. And he would say, no, I assert it is ink on your calendar that is the most powerful force in the universe. If you're a person of action and person of responsibility, your calendar often dictates what you're doing and when you're doing it. And if you don't apply ink on your calendar or digital appointments on your Outlook or whatever for things that are directly related to your goals will evaporate.
And what would you say? How do you help your clients to really zero in on a goal so that they literally own it on the interior and it's not just something on a printed page? Like if let's say your client wants to go from a business that's maybe has a revenue of, let's say, 500,000 a year, and they want to double it in 1 year, they want to get to $1 million. How do you really get them to center on that so they own that goal over against it just being something they write down?
Yeah, in a coaching conversation, that's life. The coaching conversation is in many ways the life to the goal, because I think a lot of people get into their head when they're writing a goal down on a sheet of paper. The coaching conversation is really allows it gets it into their heart. What does that mean to you? Right? If you went from $500,000 in revenue to $1 million in revenue, what would that mean to you?
And Glenn, in a coaching conversation with a client, how do you help them to own the goal so it's not, let's say a client wants to go from, in their business, revenues of 500,000 and they want to just in 1 year double that to $1 million of revenue. And how do you make that more than just something on a piece of paper that they'll really own that with enough energy that they can then take action on that?
Yeah, I think that illustrates the real value of working with a coach, because when you write a goal down on a piece of paper, you really are functioning out of your cognitive ability, and it becomes a cognitive goal. But life or dimension really doesn't come until you also tap into the heart, and a coaching conversation can do that. So one of my favorite conversations around goal setting is okay, you want to go from $500,000 to $1 million. Why? Is a really good question to ask. And very often clients will, well, because I'm supposed to, that's why I went into business, and they'll tap into some pretty generic answers. But I'll even press a little bit further and ask this question: what would that mean for you? From a perspective of, being able to do things for your children, or being able to afford something that you wanted to do, or it being an effective scorekeeping mechanism, or tap into a degree of security. Oftentimes there is an emotional component to what lies behind that goal, and it's that emotional component that I want to feed. The calendar creates the avenue or the structure that I can pursue the goal, but I'm not going to pursue the goal unless there's some fuel driving me. And so that's one of the things that I think really is helpful. Is there anything that you do as a coach to help sort of provide sort of that emotional ownership?
Yeah, I would essentially just second what you said. Some specific tactics that I would use is when you're thinking about how would that feel. I always want to listen to my client, how they like to describe things. Like myself, I'm a visual person, so a lot of the language I use will be something that I could actually see. So if I had a client that was mostly visual, I'd want them certainly to paint the picture, but I'd also press them to bring in maybe all of their emotions. So like if you, again, wanted to double your income, think about your kids here. And if you have small kids, think about yourself on vacation at the beach or wherever you like to go and hear your children laughing. And picture yourself giving them a hug. So you bring that kinesthetic part of yourself into your whole body just to get all the emotions, all the senses. What does it even smell like to double the money that you would get? And again, that may sound kind of hokey, but all those things locks it on the inside. And then you can, when you're reviewing your goals, you're not just looking at that piece of paper, you're then re-experiencing, because essentially you're, by talking about it with different emotions and parts of yourself, you're actually experiencing hitting the target before you even have, and that then pulls you, because that's what the goals do, right? They're essentially, you don't want to be the person has to be kicked in the butt to get a goal. You want a goal that literally throws a rope back to you and is pulling you towards it, because it's going to be so awesome when you hit it. So I mean, those are some of the things that I try to do. It works for myself.
Yeah, and even as a coach, one of the things that I will do occasionally, I try not to do it too often, but occasionally I will use personal stories as an entrepreneur to help connect them, especially around some of these. And I'll tell the story of when we were starting Awake, and I was so stressed because everything had to work right financially, because we were bootstrapping everything. And I remember the time that the car broke down, and I had a $700 or $800 bill, and I could write that check and not worry about some other stuff, because there was such a long period of time where one unplanned financial event might have led to financial heartache or disaster. And so telling somewhat of a story like that can help tap people into what's really driving me in some ways is to get past that point of fear or dread.
Yeah, and that's a great illustration, because when you set goals, the whole point of setting a big goal is you don't know how you're going to get it done. So like if I want to double my income, that's can be terrifying, let alone if you're starting your business and don't even know how you're going to pay the bills long term. So in a sense, this whole business of fear, we probably can talk about that for a while, because in a sense, life is essentially a series of growth from really one fear to another. Because as entrepreneurs or persons that are trying to achieve anything, when you set a goal, I mean, the ideal world, you're going to have 100% confidence that you're going to make it.
Yeah.
But then, I mean, that's if you're 100% confident that you can hit your goal isn't big enough. Yeah. Because it's back to that growth piece. And so like the fear, I mean, when you set a goal, that's why you want to own it, because you want to commit to that goal. I mean, we like Dan Sullivan's, some of his coaching. So he talks about the 4 C's, right? You have that commit to a goal, and then fear, because that's going to happen every single time. And then what do you need to get through fear? The second C, courage. Yeah. And then you learn how to do it because you've been working at it. It gives you the capabilities, and then voila, now I'm confident. Yeah. I've hit my $1 million. And so, okay, what am I going to do now?
Do it again.
I'm going to do it again. Let's go for $2 million next year. And then guess what? I'm going to make that commitment. I'm going to be afraid all over again. And so it's like it's this. So goals also help us. It's kind of like reps at a gym. We're building muscles. So in advance, before we know how to do something, we can realize, okay, I can see myself doing it. I have to go through this fear process. And that's, again, what we as coaches can help you with too, because anybody that's trying to achieve anything, and that's including us, you hit these periods of fear where you need courage. And sometimes you need somebody like a coach who's encouraging you, talking about these very things, helping you get through the mental side of achievement, so that you can then break through these fear barriers and just and hit your dreams.
This is a conversation that you and I could probably go on hours about. One of the other things that I think is really helpful when you're looking at goal setting or valuable conversations is the word decision, decide. Its origins are rooted in the idea of killing something. I mean, homicide, suicide, infanticide, and decide all have the same suffix. And so the question I think is worth asking, if you're going to pursue this goal, what other goals are you not going to pursue, or what are you going to kill? And I think it's really important to get in touch with, you don't want to add more and more to your life. Sometimes when you add a big goal, you have to subtract other things that have had your attention. Final thing I just want to ask you is, from a very practical perspective, if you are a person who's doing no goal setting or poor goal setting, or may have done good goal setting in the past but have gone through a stretch where that just hasn't been a priority, where would you encourage people to start? What are 1 or 2 or 3 actions that people can take immediately just to get better at goal setting?
I think one of the things that you could do is just take a sheet of paper out, and you can even make a bucket list if you wanted to. Like, what are the things I'd like to accomplish the rest of my life? I mean, that may have nothing to do with your business, but that just simply, you want to find a way to get yourself to project to the future. Because if you're struggling, like as you get older, I turned 50 this year. I don't know how old Glenn is, but he might be somewhere around there too. I mean, as we get older, we have sometimes we kind of run out of energy. But one of the things that can give you those energy jolts is to, again, be directed at something. Like I know guys that are in their 70s, like I think of my own father, he still works every single day, though he's retired, because that gives him energy and drive. And so, one of the things I'd say, if you're lacking some passion right now, maybe it's for your business, maybe it's in your relationship, maybe it's in your finances, try goals out and ask yourself, what do I really want in these different areas? And you'll find that actually revitalizes you because it gets you thinking about the future. And that's what gives us energy. That's what gives us meaning. And that's what makes life satisfying and fun. And that's what we want. We want, you always want to ask, are you having fun in your business? Goals will help you have fun again.
Yeah. I can't tell you how important it is just to follow that simple piece of advice of pulling out a pen and a paper, right? And writing something down. I want, or I would like to see this happen, finish that sentence. Or I want to go from X to Y. In some way, get that down on a sheet of paper. I would encourage you also to go public. I think that it's important for you to have conversations with folks around either the lack of passion or the lack of clarity. And working with a coach, especially if you own a business or you lead others, working with a coach is incredibly valuable in helping bring clarity to your goals and also action. So don't hesitate to send us an email. I'm Glenn, Glenn, at awakeconsulting.com, Brian at awakeconsulting.com, or you can just send it to info at awakeconsulting.com. We will get back in touch with you and figure out how to get you moving forward. But it's been a pleasure for you to listen in on this conversation.